Thank you so much, Eric. That was beautiful. Hello again. My name is Jamie. I use they, them pronouns, and I identify as non-binary and bisexual. It's taken me a very long time to be fully comfortable with saying this out loud. Sometimes it still brings me fear and anxiety, like right now. It takes practice, from adding my pronouns at the end of my email to offering them to a small group during introductions to coming out to people at work who met me years ago but have never truly known me. After 2 years of a very positive working relationship, my boss first learned about my gender identity through my email signature. I hadn't meant to share it with him. My work email was down for the day, and I had switched to my personal account without removing my signature. And when he asked me about it, my heart pounded loudly and my voice wavered. I stuttered and shook, and I couldn't meet his eyes. And I knew he would be accepting and open. He has a trans child and is very advocative for queer rights, and we'd had a large number of conversations discussing politics, queerness, and emotional well-being, etc. And I was still so afraid. Afraid that someone who I trusted and had garnered a good relationship with would be hurt or uncomfortable with my coming out. Would they be accepting of who I am specifically? Would they be hurt that I hadn't told them before, that I kept things from them? Would they learn this about me and disregard it and disrespect my identity because it goes against what they've previously known? When I was 16, I had my first boyfriend. This was after dating the only known lesbian in my high school for the better part of a year, and I was already known as one of those girls who are dating each other. I had already come out as bisexual and gender neutral, though I don't doubt that the entirety of my school viewed me as a cis lesbian, solely based on what they assumed of my relationship and my feminine presentation. It's not a bad thing, of course, but I'm not a cis lesbian, so. When I started a relationship with a boy, all of that vanished completely. There were no more weird looks as I held my partner's hand in the hallway. No more teachers approaching me, telling me that I was so brave. My own family and friends didn't have to force themselves to be congratulatory or supportive of my relationship. It was like the world just let out this breath that it had been holding in. Finally, we don't have to act differently around Jamie anymore. When I started going out with this boy, I very nervously told him about my identity and what it meant. I asked him if he had any questions, if he felt differently about me because of the way that I identify. He said no. He seemed to hear what I had to say, and we moved on quickly. At the time, I was glad that there was no backlash, no confrontation or confusion or rejection. But as time went on, I started to notice things. This is Jamie, my girlfriend. Jamie and I are going to the movies. She's really excited. I'm going to Jamie's to meet her family. 6 months into our relationship, I approached the subject again, asked if he was having a hard time with gender-neutral pronouns, and the answer I got was, "Oh, I kind of forgot." It stays with you, and it only has to happen once. It only has to happen in the smallest of ways, but it stays with you. When my boss still refers to me with she, her pronouns, I feel my heart drop just a little every time. When my partner struggled with the use of gender-neutral pronouns and my identity as a non-binary person, it almost broke us up. When my dad makes jokes and calls me it, because making fun of me makes it easier to digest the fact that I don't want to be just his little girl. I want to be me in the fullest and most comfortable way that I know how, to be proud and unapologetically myself. He chips out a little piece of my trust in him, and the foundation of our relationship begins to crumble. I came to UCV because I was looking for a community to support me, to get to know me, and to help me get to know myself. I came here to learn, to find faith in myself and others, and over time I started to realize that maybe I didn't have to hide here. I started using my preferred pronouns in emails and introductions to a group. I joined up with an amazing bunch of queer people and allies that have helped me discover and question and solidify who I am and what queerness means to me. But even in such a welcoming place, the foundation of trust can be chipped away at. From being misgendered, to being singled out as a queer person, to having people refer to me by my dead name, and the amount of joy and acceptance that I feel from this place and many of my other relationships drains and turns into this muddy, sticky dread. It shouldn't be up to me. It shouldn't be up to any queer person to have to educate, to risk their own safety, to risk becoming a target simply because they want to be accepted and respected. Every queer person carries a burden of having to explain their own queerness, their friends' queerness, or even the world's queerness to people who don't even have to think about who they like or how much more comfortable they would be if only they were just born in a different body. Please do your research. There are so many resources, so many stories of queer people and what they have gone through and what they still go through every day. So society is filled with queerness in people, in nature, in politics, in fiction, and history. And I guarantee that learning how to use gender-neutral language as a norm, instead of insisting on gendered phrases, pronouns, and spaces, will make a queer person light up at the smallest mention. My heart soars when I hear people I care about using my preferred pronouns. It's the tiniest thing, and you would think that I would get used to it or expect it from the people that I care about. But when I hear my partner telling his friends and family, Jamie plays a lot of these video games, I think this is their favorite. Jamie and I are going to see their family. My partner is coming with me on a trip, and I can't wait to go with them. It almost brings me to tears every single time. And it doesn't stop there. Ask yourself how you can become more accepting of gay, asexual, polyamorous relationships, or any relationship that isn't heteronormative. Ask yourself if you assume someone's gender based off the way they look, and practice asking for pronouns in everyone, not just gender nonconforming people. Ask yourself how you might subconsciously be making queer people uncomfortable. Ask yourself how society has trained you and taught you to act and think a certain way, and ask how you can unlearn that. Ask yourself if you've been wrong. It takes time to make change, but the best way to start is with yourself. Thank you.
Oh, wow. Thank you so much, Jamie. My name is Carly. I use she, her pronouns, and I identify as lesbian, gay, or queer. Queer, as you may know, was a term that was used in the past derogatorily for people of sexual minorities, particularly gay men. Many people in the LGBTQIA2S+ community have since reclaimed the word as a means of empowerment rather than disempowerment. Today, it is often used as an umbrella term for those that encapsulates all sexual orientations and gender identities in this community, as well as amplifying that gender and sexual orientation can be fluid. But it is also a very personal and political term that is inextricable from the pushing of boundaries. It reminds us of the origins of Pride, a protest against oppressive, unjust laws and state-sanctioned police violence. We need to take a good look at what we're comfortable talking and thinking about and what we aren't. It's really wonderful the steps we've taken towards acceptance. Even in the 10-some years or so since I was in high school, I can see so much more representation and activism and learning opportunities for the public. And I am very grateful that today's youth has that. Just spending time with the youth group at UCV makes me very appreciative of everything that they are now growing up with. But not every identity, group, or individual has been brought into the mainstream yet. We can use the example of RuPaul's Drag Race. In the past few years, it has soared in popularity and has become one of America's top reality TV shows, attracting millions of viewers and fans from around the world, including myself. But even this show, which claims to celebrate diversity, has had many problematic instances of classism, ableism, and transphobia. Even people who are in the community and steeped in these ideals and working for equality can have unintentional biases and blind spots that take time to look at and address and learn from. But first, you do have to look at them. It just goes to show that even when people become more open-minded, the most vulnerable members of our society will always bear the brunt of systems of oppression. And yet, our pride movements tend to be led primarily by white, cisgender, gay people, centering their own concerns and needs. Marriage equality and the right to have children, for instance, was a huge and hard-won fight in the past few decades in Canada and more recently, the United States. Though wonderful and a huge feat, and I hope that many countries will follow suit, the right to marry is not the be-all, end-all of queer rights. In fact, it might be more accepted because of its proximity to traditional heterosexuality. We aren't just fighting for marriage, we're fighting for the rights of sex workers, for transness and gender nonconformity, for full sexual and bodily autonomy, for queer-only safe spaces, for those on the asexual and aromantic spectrum, for polyamory and other non-traditional forms of love, connections, and relationships, for underhoused people, for racialized people who are over-policed, among many other fights. So when we see our causes flattened into a yearly parade, and when corporations who are known for social, labor, and environmental abuses cover themselves in rainbows for the month of June to appear more woke, we know this isn't true progress. LGBTQ+ organizations dominated by white people making alliance with corporate and state institutions, while people of color are continually mistreated by those same institutions, is not progress. I understand. Many people in the community just want to be brought into the fold, to feel normal, and that's completely valid. It makes sense that we want to be treated the same as straight people and receive the same benefits and be viewed more or less the same way. But we still must recognize that the system isn't set up for the majority of people to succeed, and rather than being accepted into it and further normalizing it, which is really just redefining the cultural boundaries of exclusion, we should tear it open and rebuild it, moving beyond fragile acceptance to radical change. This is what queerness means. I was lucky enough to not have grown up in an explicitly discriminatory town or family. I never had members of my community directly tell me it was wrong to be gay, though I did receive a few comics from Jehovah's Witnesses. But you internalize this idea of wrongness in different ways, through well-intentioned whispers from family members or offhanded comments, sideways stares from classmates, questionable comments made in TV shows and movies that were laughed off as jokes, and even through the silence. After all, if difference is never spoken aloud, are we sure it really exists? And throughout it all, we're saturated with overwhelming straightness. Everywhere you look, the families around you, your books, movies, music, education, everything seems to represent the dominant, normal, white, heterosexual, nuclear family structure. Again, we have come a long way over time, but this is still the reality for many. Heteronormativity becomes so ingrained in every part of life that it becomes really, really hard to envision yourself outside of it. And that's the thing that kept me forcing myself for years to go out with men again and again, even though I knew it felt inherently wrong, just telling myself that I wasn't trying hard enough, that the right guy would come along eventually, or that, at worst, I was simply broken and incapable of love. It wasn't until much later that I found a word for this, compulsory heterosexuality, as well as a whole community of people who went through very similar feelings and struggles as my own. I know now that we are never alone, but we are tricked into thinking that we are by nebulous ideas of normal. That's why it's not enough to simply be non-exclusive in the ways that we live, act, and interact with each other. We need to be loudly inclusive. We need diverse representation. We need to unlearn the norms that we were socialized in since birth and practice radical self-love and acceptance. We need to consider the intersections of oppression and reflect on how racialized members of the LGBTQIA2S+ community may face different kinds of discrimination. We need to encourage exploration, ambiguity, and even uncertainty. As marginalized folks, we don't always have the privilege of assuming that any given person in a room has our best interests at heart. And as a cis, white, mostly feminine-presenting lesbian, I realize that I do have a lot of privilege of being the so-called palatable, acceptable version of queerness. But it's not my job, nor anyone else's job, as Jamie's already mentioned, to convince you of our harmlessness or our worth. None of us should have to strain to be recognized or validated, no matter how niche our identity may be. Sometimes I get tired of using my energy to try to explain something like diversity within sexual and romantic orientations and gender identities, to help someone wrap their head around it, to try to relate to people different from them as fellow humans. But here's my opinion. Understanding is not what's most important, though it does help. We don't need you to understand. We need you to accept us regardless and respect us. In fact, straight people will never really understand what it's like to be a gender or a sexual minority and all the unique beauty and challenges and joys that come with it. You may never know what it's like to fear rejection from family and friends simply because of who you love, or to have to hide your relationships for your or your partner's safety, or to cry tears of joy at your first Pride celebration after finally feeling loved and recognized for the thing that so many other people hate about you. Call us how we want to be called. Make space for our voices. Ask yourself why a person's identity or presentation might make you uncomfortable. Let yourself sit in that discomfort. And embrace fluidity. After all, we humans are ever evolving. Some people come out first as trans and then later as non-binary. Some people will identify as straight for most of their childhood, then bisexual, then asexual, then eventually lesbian. Guilty. Some people will change their pronouns over years or by the day. Some of us reject labels completely, while others are desperate to find ones that feel right. And then, of course, there are people who live in places where they are not even free to question or explore. All of these are valid. Every time someone assumes my sexual or gender identity, or those of my queer peers, I feel a little bit smaller. Every time I have to correct someone, I have a little bit of fear of their reaction, even within UCV. And that indicates some self-work that I still have to do, but also work we need to do as a community. I want you to leave here asking yourself what you can do, both as an individual and an organization, to keep people from feeling small, to make sure everyone feels included, accepted, recognized, and celebrated. Now, please rise if you are willing and able to join us in. Thank you. Thank you. Now, please rise if you're willing and able to join us in singing hymn number 170.
Thank you, Carly and Jamie. That was amazing. And as chair of our Genders and Sexualities Alliance, if you're looking for education or support, I welcome you to our GSA meetings. And maybe at some dance situations, they have a pre-session for newbies. So I'm willing to lead the pre-session for newbies so you can learn a bit more if you need to. So our closing words are attributed to an elderly aunt in UK who went viral with her poem on gender-neutral pronouns. Maybe her name was Mary. Not me personally. This person I know wants to be called they. It could bring us closer to see them that way. It's a strange thing to think and harder to say, but they are so happy when the effort is made. For all the theys and thems, it is this that I pray, that we be kind and accepting, and just let them be they. So we extinguish the chalice, but not the light of understanding, the warmth of community, and the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we meet again. Carry the flame.